There's a moment when you realize you've been putting in all the effort. You don't announce it. You don't even acknowledge it to yourself at first. But something inside you starts calculating, measuring what you give against what you receive. And here's the part nobody talks about. The moment you start keeping score is the moment you've already begun to withdraw, not consciously, but instinctively. I'm speaking to you from about 15 years ahead of where you are right now. I've lived through what you're experiencing, the slow fade, the gradual retreat, the quiet shutdown that happens so gradually you don't even notice it's happening, until one day you wake up and realize you've stopped trying. Not dramatically, not with anger or resentment, you just stopped. You think this is your personal story, but for many men, it feels like a shared experience in 2025. Let me tell you what's really happening when men lose interest in dating, because what everyone calls giving up is actually something much more complex, much more necessary, and much more intelligent than anyone wants to admit. The hidden truth. Here's what no one tells you about male interest. It doesn't disappear overnight, it erodes, slowly, systematically, like water wearing down stone. One unanswered text at a time, one cancelled plan after another, one conversation where you do all the emotional heavy lifting while the other person appears distracted. You start noticing patterns. How she responds to your messages 3 hours later with one-word answers. How she's always available for her friends but needs to check her schedule when you suggest dinner. How she talks about her problems for 40 minutes but changes the subject when you mention yours. Most men think this is normal dating friction, temporary imbalance that will correct itself. So you adjust, you give more, you try harder, you become more understanding, more patient, more accommodating. But here's what's actually happening during those adjustments. You're training yourself to accept less. You're rewiring your brain to find satisfaction in scraps of attention. You're teaching your nervous system that your needs come second, often without realizing it. And your subconscious is keeping a very detailed ledger. The human brain is designed for reciprocity. When we invest emotional energy, we expect emotional returns. Not immediately, not in exact measurements. But over time, the balance needs to feel fair. When it doesn't, something primal starts shutting down. Not anger, not resentment, just a quiet withdrawal of investment. You already know this. I'm just saying it out loud for you. But here's where everything changes. The turning point. Picture this scene. You're sitting in your car after work, phone in your hand, you've typed out a text asking how her day went. Your thumb hovers over the send button, and for the first time you hesitate. Not because you don't care, but because you suddenly realize you've sent this exact message 17 days in a row, and she's responded with genuine interest maybe 3 times. That hesitation is your nervous system protecting you. Your brain running a cost-benefit analysis you didn't consciously request, calculating whether the emotional energy you're about to spend has any reasonable chance of return based on past patterns. You delete the message. This isn't giving up. This is your psychological immune system kicking in. Your mind recognizing a pattern that your heart isn't ready to acknowledge yet. The pattern of diminishing returns, the mathematics of unreciprocated investment. Most men experience this moment alone, in cars, in quiet apartments, during late-night walks, always in solitude, because this realization feels like failure, like you're not man enough to make it work, like you're weak for needing balance. But what if it's actually intelligence? Your dopamine system is designed to reward pursuit, the chase, the uncertainty, the challenge of winning someone over. But once the neurochemical reward stops coming, once the pursuit becomes predictable investment with unpredictable returns, your brain starts looking for better opportunities, not consciously, automatically. This is why men can seem fine one day and distant the next. It's not a switch being flipped, it's a threshold being crossed. The moment when subconscious calculation overrides conscious intention. You didn't choose to lose interest. Your nervous system chose for you as a form of self-preservation, and this is where everything gets complicated. The psychological breakdown. What happens next is invisible to everyone around you, including yourself. You start managing your own expectations, lowering them, adjusting them, making them more realistic, which sounds healthy, mature, but it's actually a form of emotional anesthesia. You stop looking forward to her texts, you stop planning special dates, you stop investing mental energy in future scenarios with her. Not because you're angry, because your brain is protecting you from disappointment it has learned to expect. Many men describe this as feeling numb, disconnected, like they're going through the motions of a relationship without feeling invested in the outcome. They blame themselves, think something's wrong with them, wonder if they're incapable of deep connection. But numbness isn't pathology, it's protection. Your nervous system is designed to withdraw investment from unrewarding activities. When you touch a hot stove, you pull your hand back. When you invest emotional energy repeatedly without reciprocation, your brain pulls back your emotional availability. Same mechanism, different application. The tragedy is that most men interpret this protective withdrawal as personal failure. They think they should be able to maintain enthusiasm regardless of reciprocity. They believe that real men don't need emotional return on investment, that needing balance makes them weak, so they stay in situations that are slowly draining them. They continue giving energy they don't have to people who don't appreciate it. They mistake emotional exhaustion for maturity. And their interest continues to fade, not because they want it to, because they've taught their nervous system that this relationship is a poor investment. And nervous systems are excellent accountants. You noticed this weeks ago. You just didn't trust your own observations yet. The thing about emotional labor is that it's invisible until you stop doing it. When you're the one always initiating conversations, always planning activities, always managing the emotional temperature of interactions, it feels normal, natural. Like that's just how relationships work, until you get tired. Not angry tired, not resentful tired, just tired. Bone deep, soul-level tired of carrying the emotional weight for two people. Most women don't realize how much emotional management men do in these situations, how much mental energy goes into reading her moods, anticipating her needs, avoiding topics that might upset her, timing conversations for when she's most receptive, calibrating your own emotional expression to match what she can handle. This isn't conscious manipulation, it's unconscious adaptation. Men naturally adjust their emotional output to maintain relational harmony, but adaptation requires energy, and energy is finite. When men start losing interest, they're not becoming selfish, they're becoming protective of their remaining emotional resources, but the truth was still waiting for you. The cost of returning. Here's what happens when men imagine going back to full investment after they've started withdrawing. They picture the emotional labor, the careful calibration, the constant giving, the endless patience, the management of someone else's emotional world while neglecting their own, and they feel exhausted before they even try. This is why conversations about working on the relationship often trigger male withdrawal, not because men don't want intimacy, but because they're already depleted. The suggestion to give more when they're already giving everything feels impossible. Men often describe this as feeling trapped, caught between wanting connection and needing peace, between caring about her and caring about themselves, between being a good partner and being a whole person. The modern dating landscape makes this worse. Dating apps train people to treat relationships as disposable. Social media provides constant comparison and endless options. The cultural message is that if something isn't working perfectly, you should upgrade instead of repair. So men find themselves in relationships that require enormous emotional investment, with people who have one foot out the door. They're expected to provide boyfriend-level commitment to someone who's treating them like an option. Your nervous system recognizes this imbalance even when your conscious mind doesn't want to acknowledge it. And nervous systems are designed for survival, not romance. What would you lose if you went back to caring fully? Your peace, your emotional reserves, your sense of self, your mental space, your ability to think clearly about what you actually want. Most men don't realize they've been slowly erasing themselves until they stop, until they pull back and suddenly remember what it feels like to have thoughts that aren't about managing someone else's emotional world. The silence you've been avoiding might be the only honest voice left, and this changes everything about how you see relationships. The new realization: men aren't avoiding relationships because they're afraid of commitment. They're protecting something they didn't know they had lost, something they only rediscovered when they stopped giving it away, their own emotional equilibrium. When men withdraw from dating, they often experience something unexpected. Relief. Not the dramatic relief of escaping something terrible. Quiet relief. The relief of no longer having to monitor someone else's emotional temperature, of not having to manage outcomes they can't control. This relief reveals something important. How much energy they were spending on emotional labor they didn't choose. How much of themselves they had adapted away to fit someone else's needs. how much peace they had traded for the possibility of connection. Most men feel guilty about this relief. They think it means they don't want love, don't want partnership, don't want intimacy. But relief doesn't mean rejection, it means recognition. Recognition that they were giving more than they could sustainably offer. You didn't leave the relationship, you went quiet. There's a difference. The quiet isn't absence, it's presence. Presence with your own thoughts, your own needs, your own pace, your own emotional rhythm, things that get lost when you're constantly calibrating to someone else's frequency. Men who have experienced this quiet often describe it as remembering who they are. Not who they are in relationship to someone else, just who they are, what they think, what they want, what feels right to them without external input. This isn't selfishness, it's self-recovery. But here's what most people misunderstand about this process, the disappearing act. Men don't wake up one morning and decide they're done. That's not how interest dies. It fades like a signal weakening over distance. One conversation at a time, one ignored gesture after another. One moment of feeling invisible while sitting right next to someone. And here's what nobody talks about. The moment you stop reaching out isn't when you stop caring. It's when you finally start listening to what the silence has been telling you all along. Most men experience this withdrawal as something happening to them, like they're broken, like their capacity for love just switched off without warning. But what if it's actually your nervous system finally doing its job? I've watched this pattern repeat in many men I've known, including myself. The slow recognition that you're carrying the entire emotional weight of something that was supposed to be shared. The gradual understanding that your investment stopped yielding returns months ago. You already know this story. You're living it right now. But here's the part that changes everything. The mathematics of withdrawal. Your brain keeps score even when you don't want it to. Every text you send that gets a delayed one-word response. Every plan you make that gets cancelled last minute. Every conversation where you ask about her day and she talks for 20 minutes, then changes the subject when you mention yours. You're not calculating these moments consciously, but something deeper is running the numbers, adding up the energy you give versus the energy you receive, measuring the enthusiasm you bring against the enthusiasm you encounter. And when the math stops working, something inside you starts protecting itself. This isn't emotional immaturity. This is psychological survival. Your nervous system recognizing an unsustainable pattern and quietly adjusting your investment accordingly. Not dramatically, not with announcements or ultimatums, just a gradual reduction in emotional availability. Men often describe this as losing the spark, feeling disconnected, going through the motions. But what they're actually experiencing is their subconscious mind withdrawing from a situation that's been slowly depleting them. You didn't choose this withdrawal. Your nervous system chose it for you. And this is where everything becomes clear. The invisible emotional labor. Here's what most people don't understand about male emotional investment. When men care, they become emotional managers, not by choice, by instinct. They start reading moods before walking in the room, timing conversations for when she's most receptive, avoiding topics that might create tension, calibrating their own emotional expression to maintain relational harmony. This management happens below the threshold of conscious awareness. Men don't think, I need to manage her emotional state. They just start doing it, automatically, naturally, the same way they'd adjust their driving based on road conditions. But emotional management requires enormous mental energy that gets redirected from their own emotional processing, energy that could be spent on their own thoughts, their own needs, their own emotional development. Many men don't realize how much of themselves they've been giving away until they stop, until they pull back and suddenly remember what it feels like to have mental space that isn't occupied by someone else's emotional weather. You've been doing this for months without recognizing it. The exhaustion you feel isn't laziness, it's depletion. The natural result of giving more emotional energy than you're receiving, of managing two people's emotional worlds while only one person appreciates the effort. But here's what happens when you imagine going back to full investment, the price of re-engagement. Picture yourself deciding to try harder, to reinvest fully, to bring back the enthusiasm you had 6 months ago. Your nervous system immediately calculates what that would cost. The emotional labor, the careful calibration, the constant giving, the endless patience required to manage someone who doesn't manage you in return. And before you even try, you feel tired. This exhaustion isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Your subconscious mind protecting you from repeating a pattern that was slowly erasing you. Your psychological immune system preventing you from investing energy you don't have in someone who doesn't appreciate what you've already given. Most men interpret this protective exhaustion as personal failure. They think they should be able to maintain enthusiasm regardless of reciprocity. That real men don't need emotional return on investment. That requiring balance makes them selfish. But requiring balance doesn't make you selfish. It makes you sustainable. When men withdraw from relationships, they're not giving up on love. They're protecting something they didn't realize they were losing. Their own emotional equilibrium, their mental space, their peace. You didn't abandon the relationship, you stopped abandoning yourself. You thought something was wrong with you for losing interest. But here's what actually happened. Your nervous system recognized what your conscious mind refused to see, that you were slowly disappearing into someone else's emotional world while your own needs went unmet. The withdrawal wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Men don't stop caring. They stop offering themselves where it costs too much. The silence you've been carrying isn't emptiness, it's the return of your own voice. The voice that knows what balance feels like, what peace sounds like, what your own thoughts feel like when they're not constantly calibrated to manage someone else's emotional temperature. You feared this quiet once. Now it's the only voice that tells you the truth. If this spoke to you, you already know where to find me.